Hi everybody, welcome to Revitalise Meet, where I get the opportunity to meet business owners, business entrepreneurs from across the globe. And today I've got the great pleasure to be with a gentleman who's got over 10 years in business and especially launching the podcast Chef in 2020. The great opportunity to meet the one, yes, but the only, Mr. Sean Boyce. Sean, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, Lee. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You're more than welcome, Sean. It's a pleasure getting to know you over the last few weeks from a virtual introduction from one of our colleagues in Philadelphia. But today I really would like to start with for you to describe your business journey, where you've came from, where you were, and where you're heading to.
Absolutely happy to do so. And again, thanks for having me on. Journey-wise for myself, it's been quite eventful, I will say, not without its bumps in the road and challenges along the way. But if I were to summarize, everything that I've done in the past 10 years has been all of and related to building products and product businesses. Most of them have been software related. Others, especially the more frequent projects I've been involved with to date, or more recently, I should say, are of and related to productized service businesses like Podcast Chef. But the way my journey goes, I started out very technical. I worked for large companies very earlier on in my career. Eventually, I figured out I wanted to do, I wanted to move faster, break things, be much more entrepreneurial. I always had that entrepreneurial mindset. And eventually I struck out on my own. First big milestone there was attempting to expand upon where I had gained early traction previously and solving business problems through technology and building products within the companies that I was working at. When all the pressure was on me and I was in control of everything, doing it for myself the very first time, completely on my own. Ultimately, it was the best learning experience to date, but ultimately it was a failure. I failed trying to build my first product business, and it was defeating at the time. It felt like the end. At the time, I didn't realize that it was only the beginning. And once I understood the value of what I had learned going through that experience and made my way through it after, I took time to process it, I realized that I learned so much, but I learned a lot about basically what not to do had I were to do it over again. So I started deconstructing it and breaking it down. I then immersed myself in, what went well, what didn't go well, to learn more about what I would do differently had I did it, were I do it again. And that had led me down this path of product strategy, product management, reading every book I could get my hands on, learning everything there was to know to compare the practical experience that I had had with now a ton of theoretical knowledge that I was relatively, minorly versed in at the time, but then became much more well-versed in as I consumed all this material. Then I started reapplying all of these concepts that I had learned, with a healthy amount of being cautiously optimistic, I will say. But I started to have dramatically improved results as well, too, which led to me bringing back the product company that ultimately was unsuccessful way back when, under a new brand with a new team and a very different strategy, as well as launching Podcast Chef, which happened as recently as last year. And that's growing at a great clip now as well also. And that Podcast Chef's all about helping folks like myself who have a need. I built a product consulting company called Next Step, where I help other people avoid pitfalls and the challenges like the ones that I went through as part of my experience. So having been through it myself, now I know very well what to look for, and I can see others about to or in the process of making the same mistakes. So we help them avoid those pitfalls, and that has continued to grow. As I've continued to build that, one of the things that we developed was a mechanism to be able to strategically network and create a great organic content, but doing so as efficiently as possible because we keep ourselves busy working on projects. We're lucky enough to have that problem. So podcasting was one of the channels that we evaluated from a marketing perspective, and it worked really well for us. So what we did is we packaged that up. We built a team around it, and we started offering it to folks like us for being able to help others strategically network and create a ton of great organic content. And so far, so good there.
It's great though, because at the moment we're finding a big burst in podcasting, a burst on people looking at the content that they want to deliver. It's great actually talking to you today on a podcast about podcasting. And it's brilliant when you hear about that journey of where it's, you get some failures. They're not really failures, they're learning curves, as I like to call them. And you learn from them, adapted to them, and then brought it back again. You've always adapted to what the learnings were that were around you. So thank you for sharing that, Sean. Thanks very much. Over that time, though, with Podcast Chef and everything you've been doing for the last 10 years, you must have had some challenges at the time. But what's been your biggest achievement that's came out of a challenge that you've had on your business journey?
Great question. I would definitely say it was overcoming that first larger scale failure, I would say, and thinking about how you process that information. I had a great conversation with who I'd consider to be a mentor at this point that runs in the investor circles, when I was talking to him about this journey at the time years ago, when I was just feeling defeated, wasn't really sure what to do next. Things clearly hadn't gone according to plan, right? But they rarely do in this world, which is good and bad. Keeps it exciting, keeps it interesting. But as I was laying out the steps and what had happened, what had gone wrong, and what I didn't know about the future and all that kind of stuff, they just kind of cut me off and summarized it so well and just so beautifully, which really expanded the way that I think about these things nowadays. And it was, they asked me a series of questions about that experience to help me think about it differently. And the questions were often related to, well, if you were to do it over again, what would you do differently? Because before they asked me that question, I was talking about how, I was focusing on what didn't go well. But then as I was answering that question, I laid out the plan in terms of here's how I would do things differently if I were to do it over again. Then the only question they had for me after that is said, well, what's stopping you from doing that? And I didn't have a good answer. But it opened my eyes to the fact where it's like the opportunity is right in front of you. Go ahead and capitalize on it. And that was one of the things that helped me think about moving forward from what I had learned in terms of it wasn't the end, it was the beginning, right? You just learned about what didn't work, right? So don't do that again. Update your strategy, try some new things, and then get things unstuck and keep moving, keep growing. That combined with the knowledge that I described as part of the previous question I answered and what I learned about product management and product strategy really helped us accelerate in the right direction from that point forward. And so far, so good. I've been very lucky with everything, all the hard work we've done and our team and everything like that. And I've been lucky enough to launch subsequent product companies like Podcast Chef last year, which is growing well, and our clients are happy and they're getting a lot of value out of building podcasts of their own, and we're helping them do all of that hard work. So it's been quite the journey, but I would say, that experience alone and then overcoming that, which ultimately led to bringing, companies like Podcast Chef to market, I would definitely put down as some of the bigger achievements that we've experienced.
It's great though, the way you mentioned that is that you've got people around you, and it's those people that you've got around you which is giving you the best advice. But it's also funny when somebody gets another angle that they see it at that you don't see. You see it one direction at one point, but they're looking from another angle and they see it actually just adjust it slightly. Oh, right, okay. Then it takes you off on another tangent. That's great. That actually happened with yourselves there. From achievements, and we've been through a lot over the last 12 months. We've had everything that's going on, this lovely pandemic that we're living in, but we've had to diversify our business. We've had to adapt to overcome the challenges that you mentioned earlier. How have you adapted your business model to really sort of embrace, as we're now living in a virtual world, in essence, the whole landscape of business has sort of changed. How have you adapted your business journey?
Yeah, it's very relevant now, especially because seemingly overnight, due to the pandemic, a lot of folks, myself included, our routines were very disrupted. So how do we keep moving forward there, right? It's adapt or die. So definitely embodying those principles as much as possible. It's figuring out what the new routine was like, and then what we can do to continue the success that we have had, which is still possible, but then figure out solutions to new problems because of what has changed. So one of the bigger ones was, how do I continue to maintain the relationships I have, and how do I grow new ones? Just so happened that we've been doing podcasting for years, so we leaned into it. And like you said, podcasting has grown almost exponentially since the pandemic. has disrupted things in a significant way. So that really helped us continue along that journey. It was part of our longer term plan anyway. The pandemic had other plans, and it just so happened to line up well enough at that point. But we evaluated what was working, what wasn't. In-person events, obviously, at the time were no longer a thing. So we needed a way to continue to meet new people and build great relationships and help them, and them help us, and all kinds of cool stuff. So we continue to do that, as well as evaluating, where is the business at the moment? Where are things likely to go well and where are they not? There's been some unfortunate stories of, different businesses being impacted to different levels, right? Depending upon what it is you do and who you do it for and all that kind of stuff. And we weren't immune to it by any means. In one area, we were able to grow, and another, we shrunk. So it was figuring out where are the new patterns as well too, but it also helped me take a step back and reevaluate, what should our approach and strategy be moving forward? Because things like this don't necessarily come around all that often, but there's always, another challenge around the corner. Who knows how far away you are from it, but it's best to be prepared for it as much as you can. I like to think of, in business terms of diversification, terms of almost like tables on a leg, in terms of the more legs that you have supporting that table, the more likely that table is to stay upright if you lose a leg or two. So we've started thinking in that way, and product companies like Podcast Chef are a big part of that. And we saw a huge opportunity throughout the pandemic. In-person events were no longer a thing. Podcasting for us was working really well from a networking and content generating standpoint since before the pandemic. And we thought that was only going to become more important after, it had basically all but shut down all of our in-person events. And that ended up being the case. So Podcast Chef continued to grow, whereas other businesses we may have involved with were shrinking due to a lack of demand from everything that had come out of it. So we're still thinking along those lines. I've always been, for better or worse, trying to get myself involved in probably too much. It's the serial entrepreneur in me, but that did benefit me as it pertained to the pandemic because I didn't have all of my eggs in one basket. I did have a couple of things going on, and the ones that became lighter, we could at least temporarily suspend or wait. And then the others that became heavier, where there was more opportunity, we were able to redirect resources to those projects. So everybody thought I was crazy for working on a couple of projects simultaneously, and they're probably right. However, as it played out throughout the pandemic, it ended up being a real blessing. So I think I'm going to stick with that strategy for the foreseeable future.
It's true though, but it's also the point that what you've mentioned there is that those experiences, that knowledge that you're bringing to the table, you've got to try them. You've got to be able to balance the plates at the same time. But I think even when you look back, you've got like sort of the next step, and you've got Staff Geek, that you've got your products in analytics. So it's having those tools in your toolbox for when these challenges and these times that come up, that you can actually delve into it, pull out that tool, and that fixes that issue or that point that you have right about now. So I think building that experience up around you, Sean, is most definitely came to its fruition to be able to help you through. So being able to get that balance out.
Definitely.
Especially when we're talking about podcasting, we're talking about Podcast Chef, that when you launched it last year, if there's somebody out there now who's thinking, do you know what? I want to give podcasting a go. What would be your golden top 3 tips to somebody who wants to create and deliver their own podcast? What would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Probably my top 3 tips. Number 1 would be just get started. I have a tendency to have found myself in this situation previously, and I know others think this way as well too. One of the reasons we built Podcast Chef is because folks they thought they didn't have, the skills, the experience, the time, whatever it was. So we alleviate those concerns. But if you're thinking about giving this a shot yourself, I completely encourage it. And what I would say is just get started, right? Don't let perfection be the enemy. Just dive in, and then you'll figure it out as you go along, right? I have all my old podcast episodes up there, and the older ones sound very different than the latest ones. And it drives me crazy because we've updated our standards, and I think we've gotten better over time. However, if someone finding that for the first time, they may get a lot of value out of that original episode. That's why it remains up there. And then you can hear the history as you move forward. So don't let perfection be the enemy. Just get started and keep moving, which rolls into my second point. The second point is don't stop. just keep going, right? Be consistent with it and commit to it. I think podcasting gets romanticized in terms of, I'm going to have an experience where I have thousands and thousands of listeners. It's going to happen overnight and I'm going to be a celebrity and all this kind of stuff. Typically, it's not the case, right? Or if it's going to happen, it's going to take a while. So in order to get there, you just need to keep going. And that's what it's all about. It's about sticking to it. It's about developing a habit around it and then committing to it. If you do that, you will be successful in podcasting. You just have to keep going. And that's the second most important point, is keep going. There are going to be moments when you're not going to want to do it. And I understand, but realize that all the momentum you've built up to that point is depending upon you continuing on that journey. So get yourself in a good position to be able to commit to it. Give it a couple of months at least. Then you're going to start to see some real results. And then hopefully you have formed a habit at that point where you can continue indefinitely. That's number two. Third one is, if you are in jeopardy of either of those previous ones, hire help, right? Get someone to help you do this, right? It's exactly why we built Podcast Chef. For anybody that wants to speak to me about this stuff, I will give all this information away because I just want people to do it. If they get stuck anywhere or they want professional help or whatever, they want to level up their efforts, Podcast Chef and companies like that are out there. So hire that kind of help, find something that fits into your budget and your routine, and then leverage those resources to make sure that you keep going, right? We do everything else. You walk away with the relationships, you wind up with great content. You don't have to worry about doing all the post-production, the show notes, all the stuff that goes around having a fantastic podcast show. You get to extract all the value, and then you get to delegate all of the other work on someone else, right? So hire help if for whatever reason you're struggling with any of those previous points, because right back to point number two, just keep going. So it's, one, just get started. Two, just keep going. And three, hire help if you need it.
Yeah, brilliant. Great points to have. And I highly recommend anybody who wants to give it a try do give it a try, because there's a word that comes to mind is procrastination. People procrastinate too much on the detail instead of got the idea, put it out there and nurture it to build it from that. So thank you for sharing that, Sean. Thank you so much. With everything that we've learned today and everything that you've been speaking about as well, about your business journey, there must have been times we talked briefly early on about self-reflection. We talk about knowledge, we talk about training, the books that you've read. What have you learned yourself personally over the last sort of 12 months since launching Podcast Chef just last year? And what time have you put into place for self-reflection of what's going on around you just now?
Yep, this is a great way to think about it. I'm always I would probably summarize that in terms of like thinking about working in the business versus working on the business, which is something I'm trying to get better at managing the balance of, because I do enjoy doing both. But in terms of what I've learned about myself, this has kind of always been the case for me, and I've been lucky enough to be able to rely on it. But it's really knowing your strengths and potential weaknesses, but understanding that about yourself. You know what you can come to rely on when you need it. For myself, it's a combination of my hard work ethic and my real passion for efficiency, which is an interesting dynamic. The two are opposed at times, but it's a great balance, because I could realize that I could put the time and effort in order to achieve the goal, but there's diminishing returns. So I need to get better at being as efficient as I can as well. Also, as there's a number of competing things vying for time. So it's figuring out striking a balance between the two of those and understanding when you need to leverage one or when you need to leverage the other. So that's what I really learned about myself, is I don't find myself to be naturally gifted pretty much in any way. If there's anything I've had that's led to any form of success, it's been a combination of luck and myself just continuing to work hard on it and be very persistent with it for potentially a very long time. There's the story, or the phrase I always bring up as it pertains to stuff like that is, people think about companies like Airbnb and they see how successful they are, and they quickly think, if I had come up with that idea, I'd be a millionaire at this point. And when you hear the founders talk about the story, what they say is it took them 5 years to become an overnight success. Like, looking back, it's a very different situation. I feel a little bit, I feel the same effect myself, not to the same extent, of course, but it's definitely a lot of upfront work that goes into, getting the momentum going as it pertains to a number of these things. So that would probably be, what I've learned throughout this as an experience. And then, really understanding the fact of you need to just keep pushing. You need to keep going. You need to keep growing. You need to keep learning. So consuming all the information that you can as much as possible is really valuable. And thinking through how you're investing your time. Because it's easy, it's a little bit easier to fall into a routine where you get busy. And that takes you out of doing a number of the things you should always be doing because it's important for growth, right? So if you're going to continue to grow, you have to keep reading, you have to keep listening to great podcasts, you have to keep consuming great information, experimenting with things, learning about those, because it's going to influence everything that you do, right? So it's not just about, keep going. It's about figuring out what we could do to be faster or be smarter or see other combinations, because those can really help level up your efforts as the market continues to shift and these macro and micro level economic or just entire system-wide events happen throughout the course of history.
It's a great way to think that way as well, especially what's been happening and everything that's going on as well. So thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it, Sean. What's the next step for you? What's the next step for your business? Where's it take you to next? We talk about Podcast Chef. We're now, are we just into about a year of Podcast Chef now? What's the next step? What's the next chapter of the adventure for you?
So one thing we're really excited about, myself included, is I want to remove myself as a core component, or essentially the bottleneck is a way to think of it, from the businesses that I'm building. The idea is to better understand the value proposition, the customer, exactly what they're looking for, and building it all into a process from the beginning. Whereas previously in doing these things, I would look to find a challenge that I knew I myself personally could help get unstuck and the companies or clients of ours could benefit from. However, there's a real limitation to scaling something like that. And it may be highly dependent upon subject matter expertise, experience that you have that others don't, and just limited by your time. And that's kind of some of the stuff I'm finding myself bumping up against now at this point. So if we are to help more people, and if we are to grow and scale these organizations, I have to do it with my team. And in order to set my team up for success, I have to understand the process. So I need to know what generates consistent results. What are the steps in the process? I need to know everything necessary in order to get them started. One quote that I've heard that as it refers and pertains to this that I think is a great way to think about these things is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I try to embody that principle as much as possible by empowering my team, building a great team around me, compartmentalizing each of the components of the service that we're offering or the software that we're offering, in terms of finding someone who can just nail that and be the best at that. And then eventually removing myself from the process in phases as I start to augment the team and the company continues to grow, with the idea of taking myself out of it completely. And then my team yelling at me when I try to get involved and do something that I shouldn't be doing. So that's part of the next phase for me.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's great when you talk about it. It's like, you look at the team, and it's like team, and the analogy that I know of is together, everybody achieves more, from that part of it as well. And it's getting that team that's around you to support you and take you. And as you've mentioned all the way through today, is pushing forward, not giving up, keep it going forward, keep that strength being building in your foundations all the time. Thank you so much for sharing all the information today from your business journey, and some great hints and tips in there as well. But if someone's watching and listening today, how can they make contact with you, Sean, and to start the conversation?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Lee, and thanks a ton for having me on your show. It's a great opportunity to share my stories and answer your excellent questions. In terms of reaching out to me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's a good place to go. Just first name, last name, Sean, S-E-A-N, Boyce, B-O-Y-C-E. Search me on LinkedIn, reach out, connect. Love to have a conversation with anybody or anything I could do to help you and whatever it is you may be working on product-wise. If you'd like to reach out to me directly, email is a great mechanism in order to reach me. So just shoot me an email at Sean@podcastchef.com. So again, Sean, S-E-A-N, @podcastchef.com.
Brilliant. I would highly recommend, thank you, Sean. I would highly recommend anybody who's thinking of a podcast, thinking of ideas, thinking of what the next step is for you, is to reach out to Sean, have that conversation. Yes, we are based across the pond as such, but it's not too far to go by the powers of virtually to organize a virtual cuppa or a virtual coffee and start the conversation. So make the move, make the difference, and make the connection with Sean and his team from Podcast Chef. Sean, once again, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for being involved with Revitalise Meats.
Thank you so much for having me, Lee. It's a great opportunity to be here.
You're no problem at all. And thank you to you all for listening and for watching today. Stay tuned for more Revitalise Meets coming very, very soon, where I get the opportunity to meet many business leaders, many business entrepreneurs from across the globe, and to explore and to find out more about their business journey. Remember, everybody, keep safe, keep healthy, and as always, keep connecting. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye for now.